Early December 1943, Cairo, Egypt. The pen hovered above the page as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt prepared to write words that would reshape the trajectory of military history. His aide, Harry Hopkins, had just returned from a critical discussion with General George C. Marshall, the man everyone presumed would command the greatest military operation ever planned. But Roosevelt couldn't shake a single thought that had haunted his conscience for weeks. I cannot sleep at night with him out of Washington. The decision before him would sideline America's most aggressive combat general, entrusting command of the invasion of Europe to a master organizer who had never led troops in battle. None of them could have known that this choice would redefine both command itself and the essence of military greatness. The arithmetic of supreme leadership was being measured not in battlefield triumphs, but in organizational brilliance, a mastery that would prove more decisive than any general's tactical genius. The question had been building toward this moment since May 1943, when the Tunisian campaign concluded with the surrender of roughly 267,000 Axis soldiers in North Africa. Among the American commanders who had distinguished themselves in that victory was Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., a man whose very name already struck terror into German ranks. At 57 years old, Patton personified everything Americans imagined in a fighting general. He wore custom-made uniforms with polished brass buttons that sparkled in the desert sunlight. Twin ivory-handled revolvers hung at his sides, not for show, but as weapons he wielded with deadly accuracy. His language could make sailors blush, his temper could intimidate subordinates, and his tactical insight could annihilate enemy formations with a speed that defied traditional doctrine. Patton's journey to this moment had begun decades earlier. Born November 11, 1885, in San Gabriel, California, into a family with deep military roots, young George grew up surrounded by stories of ancestors who had fought in the Revolutionary and Civil Wars. His grandfather had been a Confederate colonel, killed at the Third Battle of Winchester, a legacy that shaped Patton's identity from an early age. He struggled with dyslexia, a condition unrecognized at the time, which made academics difficult. Yet he compensated with an unyielding will and relentless drive. After 1 year at the Virginia Military Institute, he entered West Point in 1904. Academic troubles forced him to repeat his first year, but he graduated on June 11, 1909, ranking 46th out of 103 cadets. Even then, his ferocious energy and fierce competitiveness set him apart from his peers. After graduation, Patton's path took an unexpected turn when he competed in the 1912 Stockholm Olympics in the modern pentathlon. He placed 5th overall, despite a disputed pistol score many felt should have been higher. The experience reinforced his belief in individual excellence and his conviction that America needed warriors who could stand equal to any opponent. His athletic skill, combined with his marriage to Beatrice Ayer, daughter of a wealthy Massachusetts industrialist, gave him both social stature and opportunity, accelerating his ascent through the ranks. Patton's first taste of combat came in 1916 during the punitive expedition into Mexico. Serving as an aide to Brigadier General John J. Pershing, the young lieutenant led a motorized raid against Pancho Villa's men, killing 3 of them, including one of Villa's captains. Patton personally shot 2 with his ivory-handled pistols, then strapped their bodies to his vehicles and drove them back to headquarters. The act, brutal, theatrical, and effective, made national headlines, earning him recognition as the first American officer to employ motorized vehicles in combat. More importantly, it forged a lifelong bond with Pershing, who became his mentor and protector. When America entered World War I in 1917, Patton followed Pershing to France, where he discovered his true calling: armored warfare. Tanks were a new and unreliable weapon, but Patton immediately saw their potential. He founded the U.S. Tank School in Langres, France, personally crafting its training doctrine and operational procedures. He studied French and British tank tactics, incorporating what he learned into a distinctly American approach that emphasized speed and aggression. In September 1918, Patton led the newly formed Tank Corps during the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. Wounded by machine gun fire while advancing on foot, he earned the Distinguished Service Cross and a reputation for personal courage under fire. After the war, Patton became one of the Army's loudest advocates for mechanized warfare. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, he wrote extensively, experimented relentlessly, and argued that future wars would be won by fast, mobile armored forces. He worked closely with a young Major Dwight D. Eisenhower, whom he met in 1919 to refine tank doctrine. Though their temperaments differed, both shared a vision of modern mechanized warfare that Army leadership dismissed as too radical and too costly. Budget cuts and conservative thinking kept tanks tied to infantry support, but Patton never stopped pressing for change. He designed the M1913 cavalry saber, the Patton saber, and authored essays on cavalry tactics, always seeking ways to preserve offensive momentum in the mechanized age. By 1940, as war engulfed Europe, Patton's hour had come. Promoted to brigadier general that October, he took command of an armored brigade and began training troops in the aggressive maneuvers he had refined over 2 decades. He built the Desert Training Center in California's Mojave Desert, a vast facility where American forces learned to fight in terrain like North Africa's. His methods were harsh, his standards unforgiving, but soldiers who endured his command became some of the most battle-hardened and disciplined units in the Army. When Operation Torch began in November 1942, Patton commanded the Western Task Force, landing 35,000 men on the beaches of Morocco in America's first major offensive against Axis forces. The landings demonstrated Patton's organizational brilliance. Despite facing Vichy French resistance, rough seas, and coordination problems, his troops secured their objectives and took Casablanca within 3 days. The Sultan of Morocco, impressed by Patton's bearing and success, awarded him the Order of Wissam al-Alawi, with a citation written in French. The lions in their dens tremble at his approach. More importantly, Patton demonstrated that American forces could execute complex amphibious operations and defeat determined opposition. This success earned him promotion to lieutenant general and greater responsibilities in the North African campaign. When American forces suffered their first major defeat at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, it was Patton who received the call to restore order and morale. The battle had been a disaster. German forces under Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had smashed through American lines, inflicting over 6,000 casualties and destroying or capturing substantial equipment. Major General Lloyd Fredendall, the 2nd Corps commander, had proven inadequate for the task. On March 6, 1943, Patton replaced him and immediately began transforming the demoralized Corps. He instituted strict uniform regulations demanding that every soldier wear a helmet and complete uniform at all times, even far behind the lines. He established rigorous schedules and inspections. He moved constantly through his units, talking to soldiers, examining equipment, checking positions. He demanded aggressive patrolling and offensive action, even when on the defensive. Within days, the change was visible. Soldiers stood straighter, responded crisper, fought harder. Patton brought Major General Omar Bradley as his deputy commander, recognizing Bradley's steady competence as the perfect complement to his own flamboyant aggression. Together, they rebuilt 2nd Corps into an effective fighting force. When American forces next engaged the Germans at Eluar in late March 1943, they held their ground and counterattacked successfully. Patton had proven that American soldiers could match German veterans if properly trained, disciplined, and led. This success validated his methods and established him as one of America's most effective combat commanders. The Sicily campaign in July 1943 further enhanced Patton's reputation while simultaneously creating the crisis that would alter his future. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, saw Patton commanding the 7th Army with 90,000 men landing on the island's southern beaches on July 10, 1943. His mission was ostensibly to protect the left flank of British General Bernard Montgomery's 8th Army as it drove north toward Messina. But Patton had no intention of playing second fiddle to the British. When Montgomery's forces bogged down in heavy fighting near Catania, Patton saw his opportunity. Patton launched a lightning campaign westward across Sicily, capturing Como on July 22 in a rapid advance that stunned friend and foe alike. Then he turned his army eastward, racing along Sicily's northern coast toward Messina, in direct competition with Montgomery. The race became personal, with both generals driving their forces hard to reach the strategic port first. Patton won, arriving in Messina on August 17, 1943, beating Montgomery by several hours. The victory was militarily questionable. As many argued, Patton had chased glory instead of trapping German forces, but it established his reputation as a bold, aggressive commander who achieved objectives others thought impossible. Sicily fell in 38 days with Allied casualties totaling approximately 24,850. The campaign knocked Italy out of the Wear and opened the Mediterranean for Allied shipping. But amid this triumph came the incidents that would overshadow Patton's military achievements and fundamentally alter his career trajectory. On August 3, 1943, Patton visited the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia. Walking through the wards, he encountered Private Charles H. Cool, a 26-year-old soldier from Indiana who had been hospitalized for what doctors diagnosed as battle fatigue or combat exhaustion. The soldier showed no visible wounds. Patton, who believed such conditions represented cowardice, demanded to know what was wrong with Theman. When told the soldier was nervous and could not take the shelling, Patton exploded. He slapped Coe across the face with his gloves, called him a coward, and ordered him back to the front immediately. Medical personnel were shocked, but the incident was reported through medical channels and temporarily contained. 7 days later, on August 10th, Patton visited the 93rd Evacuation Hospital. There he encountered 21-year-old Private Paul G. Bennett, another soldier diagnosed with battle fatigue. Bennett had served effectively in combat for 4 years, but had reached his breaking point. When Patton asked what the trouble was and Bennett replied, he guessed he could not take it. Patton's rage exceeded even his first outburst. He slapped Bennett twice, once so hard that the soldier's helmet liner flew off. Then Patton drew one of his ivory-handled revolvers, waved it at Bennett's head, and threatened to shoot him right there for cowardice. He called Bennett a coward repeatedly, then ordered medical personnel to return the soldier to the front or file charges against him. The doctors and nurses present were horrified, with several submitting reports detailing the general's actions. These reports reached Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, now commanding 2nd Corps, who locked them in his safe out of loyalty to his former commander. But separate reports went through medical channels to the Surgeon General's office, eventually reaching General Dwight Eisenhower on August 16th. Eisenhower faced an agonizing decision. Patton was arguably the Allies' most effective combat general, a man whose tactical abilities and aggressive spirit were considered essential for future operations. But he had assaulted subordinates, threatened to execute a soldier, and violated both military law and basic human decency. The incidents revealed a character flaw, an inability to control his temper that raised serious questions about his fitness for high command. Eisenhower chose a middle path. He sent Patton a scorching letter dated August 17th, stating that while firm measures were sometimes necessary, this does not excuse brutality, abuse of the sick, nor exhibition of uncontrollable temper in front of subordinates. Eisenhower ordered Patton to apologize personally to both soldiers, to the medical personnel who witnessed the incidents, and to every division in his army. Patton complied, though the apologies were painful and humiliating. He visited each division, admitted his actions were wrong, and asked for understanding. Many soldiers respected his willingness to admit error. Others lost faith in him. But the incidents remained sacred outside military channels until November 21, 1943, when radio broadcaster Drew Pearson revealed the slapping incidents to the American public. The reaction was explosive and divided. Some Americans supported Patton, arguing that war required hard commanders who did not tolerate weakness. Others were appalled, viewing the slappings as evidence of brutality and unfitness for command. Members of Congress demanded explanations. Secretary of War Henry Stimson and Army Chief of Staff George Marshall came under intense pressure to either defend Patton or remove him from command entirely. The controversy raged just as the most important command decision of the war was being made. That decision involved not just Patton, but also two other extraordinary military leaders whose careers had taken very different paths. Dwight David. Eisenhower had been born on October 14, 1890, in Dennis, Texas, into a family of modest means. His father worked as a mechanic at a creamery, and young Dwight grew up in Abilene, Kansas, in circumstances far humbler than Patton's privileged upbringing. Eisenhower attended West Point not from military passion, but because it offered a free college education. He graduated on June 12, 1915, ranking 61st in a class of 164 cadets. That class, later called the class the stars fell on, would produce 59 generals. Butin 1915, Eisenhower seemed an unlikely candidate for greatness. Eisenhower's early career was marked by frustration. When America entered World War I, he desperately wanted combat command, but the Army assigned him to train tank units at Camp Colt in Pennsylvania. He proved exceptionally good at training and organization, establishing an effective tank school that prepared thousands of men for combat, but he never got overseas. The war ended before he could deploy, leaving him feeling he had missed the defining experience of his generation. After the war, he reverted to his permanent rank of captain, then was promoted to major, but advancement seemed glacially slow. In 1919, Eisenhower participated in the Army's Transcontinental Motor Convoy, a 2-month trek across America that demonstrated the terrible condition of American roads. This experience, combined with his tank training, convinced him that future wars would require mobile, mechanized forces and good infrastructure. He met Major George Patton that same year at Fort Mee, Maryland, where both men were assigned to tank units. Despite their vastly different personalities and backgrounds, they became friends and collaborators. They spent hours discussing tank tactics, experimenting with equipment, and writing articles advocating for armored warfare. Their superiors, however, remained committed to traditional doctrine, and both men faced criticism for their radical ideas. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Eisenhower's career progressed through a series of staff assignments that showcased his organizational abilities while keeping him far from combat commands. He attended the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, graduating first in his class of 275 officers in 1926. This academic success brought him to the attention of senior officers who valued staff work and strategic thinking. He served as a speechwriter and aide to General John J. Pershing, helping the aging general write his memoirs. He worked under Brigadier General Fox Connor in Panama, where Connor became his mentor and shaped his understanding of coalition warfare and military history. Connor told Eisenhower that another world war was inevitable and that when it came, America would fight as part of an alliance, probably alongside Britain and France. In 1933, Eisenhower became an aide to General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff. The relationship was difficult. MacArthur was imperious, brilliant, and convinced of his own genius. Eisenhower, more modest and practical, often found himself smoothing over conflicts MacArthur created with Congress and the Roosevelt administration. When MacArthur went to the Philippines in 1935 to build that nation's defense forces, Eisenhower accompanied him as his assistant. The 6 years in the Philippines from 1935 to 1939 were frustrating professionally but educational. Eisenhower learned diplomacy, navigating the complex relationships between American military advisors, Filipino politicians, and MacArthur's enormous ego. He learned that military operations required political support, that coalition warfare demanded compromise, and that patience and tact often achieved more than confrontation. When Eisenhower returned to the United States in 1939, war had already begun in Europe. His career accelerated rapidly, as the Army desperately needed experienced staff officers to manage expansion and mobilization. He impressed everyone with his organizational abilities, his clear thinking, and his capacity for sustained hard work. In 1941, he participated in large-scale military exercises in Louisiana that showcased the Army's growing mechanized capabilities. His performance caught the attention of General George C. Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff who was building a network of talented officers to manage the coming war. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Marshall summoned Eisenhower to Washington and assigned him to the War Plans Division. Eisenhower's first assignment was to develop a strategy for the Pacific Theater. He worked exhausting hours, often sleeping in his office, producing clear, practical plans that impressed Marshall. In February 1942, Marshall promoted Eisenhower to head the War Plans Division, making him responsible for strategic planning across all theaters. Eisenhower advocated for a Europe First strategy, arguing that Germany posed the greatest threat and that defeating Hitler must be the Allies' priority. His clarity of thought and his ability to see the big picture while managing countless details made him indispensable to Marshall. In June 1942, Marshall sent Eisenhower to London as commanding general of the European Theater of Operations. It was an extraordinary advancement for a man who had never commanded troops in battle. Yet Marshall understood that Eisenhower possessed exceptional abilities suited to coalition warfare. Eisenhower's assignment was to organize American forces in Britain, maintain cooperation among allies, and prepare for an eventual invasion of France. He proved highly adept at working with the British. He built a strong rapport with Winston Churchill, earned the confidence of British military leaders, and established an integrated Allied headquarters where American and British officers collaborated closely. His diplomatic talent, willingness to compromise on minor issues while remaining firm on essential matters, and his genuine belief in partnership made him remarkably effective. When Operation Torch began in November 1942, Marshall selected Eisenhower as Supreme Allied Commander despite his lack of direct combat experience. Torch was politically delicate, requiring coordination with French forces of uncertain loyalty while balancing British and American commands with differing strategic goals. Eisenhower navigated these political challenges brilliantly, negotiating ceasefires with French commanders, managing the volatile situation around Admiral François Darlan, and keeping Allied forces focused on defeating Germany. The campaign succeeded, and Eisenhower's reputation soared. He had proven that he could lead a coalition in combat operations, even without personally commanding on the battlefield. The third central figure in this command drama was George Catlett Marshall. Born December 31, 1880, in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, Marshall came from a family with Southern sympathies. His father had been a Virginia businessman before moving north. Young George attended the Virginia Military Institute, graduating in 1901 as first captain of the Corps of Cadets. Commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry, he spent the next 15 years in assignments that quietly prepared him for high command, though few recognized his extraordinary abilities. Marshall's first major opportunity came during World War I, when he served as a staff officer with the 1st Infantry Division in France. He demonstrated remarkable skill in planning and logistics, particularly in organizing the movement of massive forces during complex operations. At the Battle of Cantigny in May 1918, the first major American offensive, Marshall's meticulous planning contributed to success. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, he coordinated the movement of more than 600,000 troops and 2,700 guns, one of the largest troop maneuvers in military history. General John J. Pershing recognized Marshall's brilliance and kept him close as his operations officer, assigning him responsibilities far beyond his rank. After the war, Marshall spent 2 decades in postings that enhanced his reputation within the Army, but left him largely unknown to the public. He served as Pershing's aide, taught at the infantry school at Fort Benning, where he trained a generation of future commanders, and held a series of staff positions that revealed his organizational genius. Known for his integrity, sound judgment, and ability to spot talent, he kept a small black notebook recording the names of promising young officers. a list that would later provide many of the Army's World War II leaders. Omar Bradley, Matthew Ridgway, Joseph Stilwell, and Dwight Eisenhower among them. In 1939, President Franklin D. Roosevelt made the extraordinary decision to elevate Marshall above dozens of more senior officers and appoint him as Army Chief of Staff. Roosevelt recognized that the looming war would require not just a field commander but a master organizer, someone who could work with Congress, oversee the rapid expansion of the armed forces, and coordinate with America's allies. Marshall assumed office on September 1, 1939, the very day Germany invaded Poland. The timing was almost providential. The U.S. Army then numbered only about 174,000 men, ranking 17th in the world, smaller even than Belgium's. Its forces were under-equipped, poorly trained and organized for a kind of warfare that no longer existed. Over the next 6 years, Marshall reconstructed the American military through a combination of political finesse, administrative brilliance, and unyielding determination. He cultivated ties with Congress, testifying candidly about military needs and securing massive appropriations for expansion, equipment, and training. He established new training centers nationwide, created fresh divisions, and supervised the induction and preparation of millions of soldiers. He rapidly promoted capable officers, ignoring seniority when necessary to ensure that the right men held the right commands. He coordinated effectively with the Navy despite inter-service friction and managed relations with challenging Allied leaders, notably Churchill, whose strategic outlook often clashed with America's. Above all, Marshall became the principal advocate for a cross-channel invasion of France. From 1942 onward, he argued relentlessly that a direct strike into Nazi-occupied France was the quickest path to victory. Churchill favored a peripheral approach, advancing through North Africa, Italy, and the Balkans, the so-called soft underbelly of Europe. Marshall countered that this would dilute Allied strength and prolong the conflict. He fought parallel battles within the U.S. military, with the Navy demanding more focus on the Pacific, and with British planners haunted by World War I's slaughter on the Western Front. Finally, he secured Roosevelt's commitment to a cross-channel invasion in 1943, with a target date of May 1944 for the operation codenamed Overlord. Having conceived, defended, and secured the operation's approval, Marshall seemed the natural choice to lead it. He was the most respected soldier in America. Churchill hailed him as the organizer of Allied victory. Stalin trusted him. Roosevelt depended on him completely. Pershing, now elderly, urged Roosevelt to appoint him. Congress expected it. Historians assumed it. But Marshall never lobbied for the job. When asked his preference, he always replied that the president must decide what best served the nation, not what benefited George Marshall. Roosevelt's dilemma was painful. Marshall had earned the command. His vision shaped Allied strategy, and his administrative mastery was unparalleled. Yet his presence in Washington was indispensable. He directed the global war effort, managed relations with Congress, and coordinated with the British, the Navy, and difficult figures like General Douglas MacArthur in the Pacific. Admirals Ernest King and William Leahy, both members of the Joint Chiefs, strongly opposed transferring Marshall, insisting that no other officer could perform his vital duties. The conferences in Cairo and Tehran in November-December 1943 forced the issue. Stalin demanded to know who would lead Overlord, suspecting further Anglo-American delays. Churchill supported Marshall but privately feared losing such a capable coalition manager. Roosevelt agonized, torn between rewarding Marshall's service and preserving his irreplaceable leadership at home. He sent Harry Hopkins to Cairo to sound out Marshall's feelings. Marshall declined to express a preference, saying only that he would accept any decision Roosevelt made. Then, on December 5, 1943, Roosevelt met privately with him. After much hesitation, the president asked what Marshall wanted. Marshall gave the same answer. Personal wishes could not influence a decision of such national importance. Roosevelt reportedly replied, "I feel I could not sleep at night with you out of the country." The decision was made. Marshall would remain in Washington as Army Chief of Staff, while another would command Overlord. On December 7, 1943, exactly 2 years after Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt informed Eisenhower of his appointment. The message was brief and informal. "Well, Ike, you are going to command Overlord." Eisenhower was stunned. He had assumed Marshall would receive the post and had prepared to take over as Chief of Staff. Instead, he now faced the greatest military responsibility in history. That same day, Marshall sent a note to Stalin and Churchill announcing Eisenhower's selection, enclosing a copy for Eisenhower with a brief message. "Dear Eisenhower, I thought you might like to have this as a memento. It was written very hurriedly by me as the final meeting broke up yesterday. The President signed it immediately. JCM signed it immediately. JCM." The decision made perfect sense in retrospect. Overlord was not merely a tactical undertaking requiring battlefield brilliance. It was the most complex logistical and organizational challenge in military history, involving over 3 million men, nearly 7,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and countless supporting units. Success depended on diplomacy, coordination, strategic insight, and the ability to unify subordinates from diverse nations and traditions. Eisenhower possessed precisely those gifts. His natural charisma and calm authority made him universally trusted, and especially respected by the British. Churchill respected him despite their occasional disagreements. Even Charles de Gaulle, notoriously difficult and suspicious of Anglo-American intentions, found Eisenhower acceptable. Eisenhower's strategic thinking encompassed not just military operations, but political consequences, economic factors, civil affairs, and public opinion. He understood that modern war was as much political as military. He had proven in North Africa and Sicily that he could manage complex coalitions under combat conditions. Most crucially, he had developed a leadership style that made subordinates feel valued while maintaining absolute authority. He listened to criticism, admitted mistakes, and learned continuously. These qualities made him ideal for supreme command of a coalition where unity of effort mattered more than tactical brilliance. As Eisenhower established his headquarters in London in January 1944, he immediately confronted challenges that validated Roosevelt's judgment. The first involved command structure. The initial plan developed under British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan called for a 3-division assault on a narrow front. Eisenhower, reviewing the plan, immediately recognized it as inadequate. He insisted on expanding to 5 divisions landing on a broader front, giving more flexibility and reducing vulnerability to German counterattack. This expansion required more landing craft, more air support, more supplies, all of which were in short supply. Eisenhower had to negotiate with Churchill, with the combined chiefs of staff and with naval commanders to secure the resources needed. His diplomatic skills and his ability to make compelling arguments won agreement for the expanded operation. The second challenge involved ground commanders. British General Bernard Montgomery would command all ground forces during the initial assault, including both British and American armies. This arrangement pleased the British but created resentment among some American generals who viewed Montgomery as cautious and arrogant. Eisenhower made the system work by clearly delineating responsibilities, giving Montgomery operational control during the landing phase while planning to shift authority to American commanders once the breakout occurred. He managed Montgomery's difficult personality, deflected criticism, and kept the coalition functioning effectively. The third and most sensitive challenge was Patton. Despite the slapping incidents, despite the controversy, despite the public outcry, Eisenhower and Marshall both recognized that Patton's combat skills would be essential once mobile warfare began. The question was what to do with him until that moment arrived. Eisenhower's solution demonstrated strategic creativity. Patton would command Third Army, which would be activated only after the invasion succeeded and a breakout occurred. Until then, Patton would serve as the centerpiece of the most elaborate deception operation in military history. Fortitude was conceived to mislead German intelligence about where and when the invasion would occur. The concept was simple. make the Germans believe the main invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel and the obvious choice for a cross-channel assault. The Allies would actually invade Normandy, which offered better beaches and room for maneuver. But the Germans must continue believing Killala was the target even after Normandy landings began. This deception required creating a fictional army that appeared to be preparing for invasion. The Phantom Force was designated 1st United States Army Group, abbreviated FUS. It existed only on paper, in fake radio transmissions, in dummy equipment positioned around Dover and southeastern England, and in reports from German spies who were actually British double agents. But FUS AG needed a commander whose appointment would seem logical and whose reputation would make the threat credible. There was only one choice. Patton, sidelined by controversy but recognized by Germans as the Allies' most dangerous combat commander, became FUSAG's commander in early 1944. The Germans accepted this completely. Their intelligence services, the AB and the SD, devoted enormous resources to tracking FUS. They photographed dummy landing craft built from scaffolding tubes and canvas. They intercepted radio transmissions from mobile units, simulating 11 non-existent divisions. They received reports from agents who were actually under British control through the double-cross system. Most convincingly, they saw Patton touring installations, giving speeches, meeting with subordinate commanders. Every bit of intelligence confirmed that Patton commanded a massive force preparing to strike Killala. German commanders believed the deception because it made strategic sense. Killala offered the shortest sea crossing, only 20 m compared to Normandy's 100 miles. Kala provided the most direct route to Germany and the vital Ruhr industrial region. Most importantly, they knew Patton was the Allies' best tactical commander. German Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, when later asked about Allied commanders, stated that Patton was your best. Erwin RML had studied Patton's tactics in North Africa. Hitler reportedly called him that crazy cowboy general, a mixture of dismissal and grudging respect. German logic dictated that the Allies would use their best combat commander for the main invasion, not a secondary operation. Therefore, wherever Patton was, the main invasion would come. The deception included one particularly audacious element. General Hans Kramer, who had commanded a Panzer division in North Africa before capture in May 1943, was being repatriated due to poor health. Before his departure in May 1944, British intelligence arranged for him to dine with Patton. Throughout the evening, Patton, presented as FUS AAG commander, mentioned Kayla and invasion preparations. Afterward, Kramer was driven through southern England, passing enormous troop concentrations. Road signs indicated he was in southeastern England near Dover. In reality, he was in southwestern England seeing actual Overlord preparations, but the deception was perfect. When Kramer reached neutral Sweden and reported to German intelligence, he confirmed everything the Germans already believed. Patton commanded a huge force preparing to invade at Kayla. While Patton played his role as decoy, Eisenhower worked exhausting days preparing the actual invasion. He moved his operational headquarters to Telegraph Cottage outside London, where he could focus without constant interruptions. He personally visited every division scheduled to participate in the assault, speaking to soldiers, projecting confidence, building trust. By June 1944, he had visited all American, British, and Canadian assault units, often spending hours talking with men who would carry out his orders. Soldiers responded to his genuine warmth and obvious concern for their welfare. They saw not a distant commander, but a leader who understood what he was asking them to do. Eisenhower also made the hardest decisions a commander faces. He approved the airborne assault despite predictions of 70% casualties for paratroops dropping behind enemy lines. He understood the risk but recognized that without airborne forces securing the invasion flanks, the entire operation might fail. He wrestled with weather as D-Day was originally scheduled for June 5th, but terrible storms forced postponement. His meteorologists predicted a brief improvement on June 6th, followed by more bad weather. If the invasion did not go on the 6th, it would need to wait 2 weeks for proper tides and moon phases, or possibly until July. The delay would compromise security and give Germans more time to strengthen defenses. Eisenhower made the call. Go on June 6th. He later wrote that it was the loneliest decision of his life. On the evening of June 5th, as troops loaded onto ships and aircraft prepared for takeoff, Eisenhower visited the 101st Airborne Division at their airfield near Neuilly. These paratroopers would drop into Normandy hours before dawn, securing bridges and road junctions. Their casualties were expected to be severe. Eisenhower walked among them, talking quietly, joking about fishing, asking about hometowns. A photographer captured an iconic image. Eisenhower speaking with Lieutenant Wallace Strobel, whose face showed the tension all soldiers felt. After the visit, Eisenhower returned to headquarters and wrote a message accepting full responsibility if the invasion failed. He carried it in his pocket, ready to release it if needed. The message read, "Our landings have failed, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." June 6, 1944, dawned with clearing skies over the English Channel. At 6:30 in the morning, American, British, and Canadian soldiers stormed 5 beaches across 50 miles of Normandy coastline. The assault involved nearly 7,000 vessels, including warships, landing craft, transports, and support ships. Over 11,000 aircraft provided air support. By day's end, approximately 156,000 Allied soldiers had landed in France. Casualties totaled roughly 10,000, with Omaha Beach accounting for most American losses, where fierce German resistance nearly threw attackers back into the sea. But the invasion succeeded. By midnight, Allied forces held their beachheads. The liberation of Western Europe had begun. Eisenhower's careful planning and diplomatic skills had produced success. The expanded assault front prevented German forces from concentrating against a single point. The airborne drops, despite heavy casualties and scattered deployment, confused German commanders and delayed reinforcements. Naval gunfire provided crucial support to struggling infantry. Air superiority prevented German aircraft from attacking vulnerable ships and troops. Most critically, the deception worked perfectly. As fighting raged in Normandy, Hitler refused to commit his armored reserves, convinced the real invasion would still come at Killala. The German 15th Army remained near Killala, waiting for Patton. For 7 weeks after D-Day, substantial German forces stayed at Killala instead of reinforcing Normandy. British double agents, particularly Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo, continued sending messages through German intelligence networks describing Fusag's preparations and explaining why the Killala invasion was delayed. Hitler believed these reports. He kept armored divisions that might have crushed the Normandy beachhead, waiting for an invasion that would never come. The Allies had hoped the deception might buy them 2 weeks. It bought them 7. Every German division at Killala was 1 fewer in Normandy, a strategic advantage worth dozens of tactical victories. Patton learned of the Normandy invasion like everyone else by listening to BBC radio on the morning of June 6th. He was devastated. Despite understanding his role in the deception, despite knowing his importance to the plan, he felt he was missing the greatest military operation in history. He wrote to his wife, Beatrice, "It'd hell to be on the sidelines and see all the glory eluding me, but I guess there will be enough for all." To his son, George, at West Point, he wrote, "This group of unconquerable heroes whom I command are not in yet, but we will be soon. I wish I was there now, as it is a lovely, sunny day for a battle, and I am fed up with just sitting." But Patton's absence was his greatest contribution. His reputation alone, his role as phantom commander of a fictional army, tied down German reserves and convinced Hitler that Normandy was a diversion. It was history's greatest irony. Patton achieved his most strategically important victory in a battle where he played no active role. His mere reputation, exploited brilliantly by Allied intelligence and Eisenhower's strategic vision, accomplished more than any tactical maneuver. On August 1, 1944, after 2 months of fierce fighting in Normandy, Patton's Third Army officially became operational. The moment he had waited for had arrived. Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, had finally broken German defensive lines west of St. Lo. Through that breach poured Patton's armored divisions in a campaign of speed and aggression that stunned the German high command. Patton employed tactics he had spent decades developing. His forces moved faster than German commanders thought possible, appearing in unexpected places, surrounding enemy units before they could react. The Third Army's advance across France became legendary. Patton's forces raced west into Brittany, then wheeled east toward Paris, then turned northeast toward the German border. By August 25th, American troops were entering Paris. By month's end, Third Army had liberated most of Brittany, closed the Files Gap, trapping German forces, and captured dozens of towns and thousands of prisoners. Patton's armored divisions advanced so rapidly that airborne units complained he kept overrunning their planned drop zones. In 30 days, Third Army covered ground that planners had estimated would require 6 months. The advance finally halted at the end of August when supply lines simply could not keep up. Gasoline consumption exceeded delivery capacity by enormous margins. Eisenhower faced a strategic choice. He could concentrate all available fuel and supplies on Patton, letting Third Army drive deep into Germany while other forces marked time. Or he could distribute resources across a broad front, allowing all Allied armies to advance steadily, but preventing any single deep penetration. Eisenhower chose the broad front strategy, believing it safer and more likely to achieve lasting success. Patton was furious, convinced he could have reached Berlin by Christmas if given supplies. The debate over broad front versus narrow thrust would continue for decades. But Eisenhower's decision reflected his strategic responsibility for the entire campaign, not just a single army's success. In December 1944, Eisenhower's strategic judgment was tested when Germany launched its final major offensive. Hitler had secretly assembled forces for a massive attack through the Ardennes forest, gambling everything on a desperate attempt to split Allied armies and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. On December 16th, 3 German armies struck American lines held by thinly stretched forces. The attack, later called the Battle of the Bulge, created a crisis requiring Eisenhower's finest performance as Supreme Commander. Within hours, Eisenhower was organizing the Allied response. He recognized immediately that the German attack, while dangerous, represented an opportunity if handled correctly. German forces were advancing beyond their supply lines, exposing themselves to counterattack. Eisenhower rushed reinforcements to threatened sectors, gave ground where necessary to preserve forces, and coordinated American, British, and French units to contain the penetration. Most crucially, he turned to Patton with an assignment that seemed impossible. The 101st Airborne Division was surrounded at Bastonia, a critical crossroads town. If Bastonia fell, German forces could push westward toward Antwerp. Eisenhower needed Patton to disengage from his current operations, pivot Third Army 90° north and attack into the southern shoulder of the German Bulge to relieve Bastonia. On December 19th, Eisenhower met with Patton and Bradley at Verdun to coordinate the response. When Eisenhower asked when Patton could attack, Patton replied he could move on December 22nd. Eisenhower, skeptical that an entire army could redeploy so quickly, called the estimate fatuous. But Patton was not exaggerating. He had anticipated this possibility. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oscar Coe, had predicted the German offensive through careful analysis of enemy movements. Patton had already directed his staff to prepare contingency plans. When he returned to headquarters in Nancy, he simply called his chief of staff and gave the code word for the operation they had already planned. Third Army executed one of the fastest and most complex maneuvers in military history. Patton attacked on December 22nd, driving 3 divisions north through blizzards and frozen ground toward Bastonia. Despite terrible weather, despite German resistance, despite supply challenges, Third Army kept moving. On December 26th, elements of the 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastonia, linking with the surrounded paratroopers. Reinforcements followed. By January's end, Allied forces had pushed German troops back to their start lines. The Bulge had been eliminated. Germany's last gamble had failed. The Battle of the Bulge showcased the perfect combination of Eisenhower's strategic coordination and Patton's tactical execution. Eisenhower organized the entire Allied response, allocated resources, made strategic decisions about where to defend and where to counterattack. Patton provided aggressive tactical leadership, accomplishing what others thought impossible. Together, they formed an unbeatable team, each contributing essential elements to victory. By March 1945, Allied forces were crossing the Rhine and driving into Germany. On March 1st, Third Army captured Trier, prompting a famous exchange. When Eisenhower's headquarters sent a message suggesting Patton bypass Trier because capturing it would require 4 divisions, Patton replied, "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. Do you want me to give it back?" The message typified Patton's aggressive confidence and his willingness to achieve objectives others considered too difficult. From March through May, Third Army raced across Germany. They liberated the Ohrdruf concentration camp, the first camp liberated by American forces. Patton forced local German civilians to tour the camp and witness Nazi atrocities. His forces captured vast numbers of prisoners linked with Soviet forces advancing from the east and penetrated deep into Czechoslovakia before orders halted their advance. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, Third Army had compiled an extraordinary combat record. From August 1, 1944 to May 8, 1945, Patton's forces had liberated or conquered approximately 81,500 square miles of territory across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, Germany, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. They had captured roughly 1.228 million prisoners and inflicted an estimated 500,000 casualties on German forces. Third Army's own casualties, while significant, were lower proportionally than other Allied armies, validating Patton's philosophy that aggressive offense saved lives by destroying enemy forces before they could organize effective resistance. Yet, it was Eisenhower's leadership that made all of this possible. His organizational mastery planned and executed the invasion. His diplomatic skills held the fractious coalition together through countless crises. His strategic vision guided operations from Normandy to the La River. His ability to manage difficult personalities, from Montgomery's arrogance to de Gaulle's prickly nationalism to Patton's impulsiveness, prevented conflicts that might have crippled the alliance. His willingness to make hard decisions, from approving high-risk operations to choosing invasion timing to coordinating responses to unexpected crisis, proved him the ideal supreme commander. The question of why America's best combat general was sidelined from leading D-Day had been answered through the operation's very nature. Overlord did not require a battlefield tactician. It required a coordinator, a diplomat, a strategic thinker who could manage the most complex military operation ever attempted. Patton was indeed America's finest tactical commander, perhaps the greatest of the war. But Overlord required different qualities. It needed someone who could orchestrate coalition warfare, balance competing national interests, think strategically about operations spanning continents, and maintain trust across governments and military services. Eisenhower possessed these qualities in abundance. Patton did not. The slapping incidents, far from being unfortunate but minor mistakes, revealed character flaws that made Patton unsuitable for supreme command. His inability to control his temper, his tendency toward impulsive decisions, his lack of political awareness. These traits might be acceptable in a corps or army commander, but were disqualifying for a supreme commander, navigating diplomatic complexities and maintaining political support at the highest levels. Roosevelt's choice of Eisenhower over Marshall demonstrated even greater wisdom. Marshall would have been an excellent supreme commander. His organizational skills were unmatched. His strategic vision was profound. His reputation was impeccable. But Marshall's true value lay in Washington, where he coordinated the global war effort, managed congressional relations, balanced multiple theaters, and maintained the political and logistical support that made victories possible. Removing Marshall to send him to Europe would have solved one problem while creating another. Eisenhower in Europe and Marshall in Washington proved the optimal combination. And Patton, despite being sidelined from Supreme Command and from D-Day itself, found his ideal role. His tactical genius and aggressive spirit were exactly what mobile warfare required once the invasion succeeded. Third, Army's performance vindicated every claim about Patton's abilities. He was indeed America's greatest combat commander, the general whose name struck terror into German hearts. But he served under Eisenhower, executing a strategic vision developed by both Eisenhower and Marshall, playing his part in a comprehensive plan that required different skills at different levels. The legacy of this command decision extended far beyond World War II. Eisenhower's success established new principles for modern military leadership. He proved that contemporary warfare requires not just tactical brilliance, but organizational excellence, political awareness, diplomatic finesse, and strategic vision. These qualities became standards for senior military leadership in subsequent decades. The American military's emphasis on joint operations, coalition warfare, and strategic thinking over purely tactical prowess can be traced directly to lessons learned from Eisenhower's success. Eisenhower leveraged his military reputation into political success, serving as President of the United States from 1953 to 1961. His presidency reflected the same qualities that made him an effective Supreme Commander: organizational competence, strategic thinking, coalition building, and to navigate complex situations without losing sight of larger objectives. He ended the Korean War, managed Cold War tensions without nuclear escalation, and established policies that guided American strategy for decades. His presidency demonstrated that skills required for supreme military command translated effectively to supreme civilian leadership. Patton never had that opportunity. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, he became military governor of Bavaria. Within months, he created new controversy: his reluctance to aggressively pursue denazification, his statement suggesting former Nazi Party members could serve in administrative roles, and his suggestions that the Allies should immediately confront the Soviet Union brought criticism from Washington and the press. Eisenhower, sensitive to political pressures, removed Patton from Third Army Command in October 1945. On December 8, 1945, Patton was severely injured in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany. His staff car collided with an American truck, and Patton suffered a broken neck that left him paralyzed from the neck down. He was taken to H. Heidelberg Hospital, where doctors could do nothing for his injuries. 12 days later, on December 21, 1945, Patton died from pulmonary edema and congestive heart failure. He was 60 years old. He was buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg among the soldiers he had commanded. His graves marked with a simple white cross identical to those of the men who served under him. Marshall continued in public service after the war, serving in roles of extraordinary responsibility. President Truman appointed him special envoy to China in 1945, attempting to mediate between nationalists and communists. The mission failed, but Marshall gained insights into Asian affairs that shaped American policy. In 1947, Truman appointed Marshall as Secretary of State. In that role, Marshall proposed the European Recovery Program in a speech at Harvard University on June 5, 1947. The program, quickly named the Marshall Plan, provided massive American aid to rebuild Western Europe's devastated economy. Over 4 years, the United States provided over $12 billion in assistance, helping 16 European nations recover from war's destruction. The Marshall Plan prevented economic collapse, created prosperity that undercut communist appeal, and established American leadership in the post-war world. It was arguably as important to winning the peace as Overlord had been to winning the war. Marshall served briefly as Secretary of Defense during the Korean War, then retired in 1951. In 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the Marshall Plan, becoming the only professional soldier ever to receive that honor. He died on October 16, 1959, at age 78 at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. President Truman attended the ceremony and later remarked that Marshall was the greatest living American. The relationship among these three remarkable leaders, Eisenhower, Marshall, and Patton, defined the Allied triumph in World War II. Each contributed vital elements that complemented one another. Marshall supplied the strategic foundation and global coordination from Washington. Eisenhower delivered organizational execution and coalition management in Europe. Patton provided tactical brilliance and offensive power on the battlefield. None of them could have achieved victory alone, but together, each serving where his particular strengths had maximum influence, they formed an unbeatable alliance. Roosevelt's insight in discerning the proper role for each man proved decisive. The decision to sideline America's fiercest field commander from leading D-Day was correct in every respect. D-Day succeeded through meticulous organization, not raw tactical genius. The invasion demanded coordination of countless details across different services and nations. It required diplomatic finesse to manage coalition tensions, strategic foresight to align the invasion with the broader war effort, patience to await suitable conditions, and courage to proceed when those conditions were merely sufficient. These were Eisenhower's strengths. Patton's abilities emerged later when the battlefield allowed mobility and aggression to decide outcomes. Using Patton first as a deception, before D-Day, and then as a combat commander afterward, showed a perfect understanding of how to employ each general for maximum advantage. The arithmetic of Allied victory was measured not by who was the most fearsome warrior, but by who was the most capable organizer, not by who could win isolated battles, but by who could manage the vast machinery of coalition warfare, not by who terrified the enemy, but by who preserved trust among uneasy allies. By those measures, Eisenhower was the only possible choice for supreme command. Patton remained essential as a battlefield commander. Marshall was irreplaceable as strategic architect. But for the unique challenge of planning and executing D-Day, and directing the campaign from Normandy to Berlin, Eisenhower possessed precisely the right blend of talents. In selecting Eisenhower over both Marshall and Patton, Roosevelt demonstrated the kind of strategic foresight that defined his wartime leadership. He understood that military organizations, like all complex institutions, demand different abilities at different levels. The qualities that make a brilliant company leader differ from those required at corps or army level, and the traits needed for supreme command are rarer still. Roosevelt recognized that Overlord required unmatched organizational and diplomatic skill more than battlefield flair, and he chose accordingly. The result was the liberation of Western Europe and the collapse of Nazi Germany. On June 6, 1944, when Allied soldiers stormed the Normandy beaches, they did so under a command structure that perfectly aligned talent with necessity. Eisenhower's organizational mastery had planned every detail. His diplomacy preserved Allied unity. His strategic vision identified the decisive approach. Marshall's backing from Washington secured resources and political strength. Patton, serving as a deception in England, tied down German reserves through reputation alone. When Patton finally entered combat 2 months later, his battlefield genius exploited the breakthroughs Eisenhower's planning had made possible. The greatest military operation in history succeeded because Roosevelt made the correct leadership choice. America's most aggressive general was not excluded from D-Day because of failure, but because the mission demanded a different kind of excellence. In choosing Eisenhower over Patton for supreme command, Roosevelt acknowledged that modern warfare is won by matching the right talents to the right challenges. Patton earned his glory in the breakout across France, the relief of Bastogne, and the final drive into Germany. But D-Day belonged to Eisenhower, whose organizational brilliance, diplomatic acumen, and strategic vision enabled the 20th century's greatest military triumph. The decision to sideline Patton was not rejection, but Recognition that ultimate command required a distinct set of abilities, ones Eisenhower possessed in abundance. Both men, serving where their unique gifts had the greatest impact, contributed decisively to Allied victory. The wisdom of Roosevelt's choice was proven in outcome: Europe's liberation, the fall of Nazi tyranny, and the establishment of a democratic peace that has endured for 8 decades. That legacy remains a testament to the truth that great leadership depends not only on courage and tactical skill, but on the judgment to place the right individual in the right position at the right time. Roosevelt possessed that judgment. His decision to keep Patton from leading D-Day while entrusting Eisenhower with supreme command reshaped military history and defined the modern age.